Well, hello and welcome back to our citywide and contracting labor laws webinar for nonprofit grantees. This webinar is hosted by the Office of Labor Standards Enforcement, OLSC, and thank you for joining us and returning. My name is Beverly Popek. I'm a Supervising Compliance Officer at OLSC and your host for the day. Our office is here to help you understand your labor requirements, and we are at our session number 5, Paid Parental Leave Ordinance. If you haven't done this already, please open up your chat box, which is found on your bottom right-hand side. We have public announcements, information that corresponds and complements the information you'll see on your screen. That'll be very useful and helpful. And please note that the slide deck and a recording of this webinar will be posted on our website in the next 24 hours. So I see that Joyce has dropped the URL where you can find that info. So check back tomorrow for a copy of the slides and recording. You can ask questions and get answers in the questions and answers box. This is a feature in our WebEx webinar, bottom right-hand side, and staff will provide answers to your questions regarding whatever you're asking in that box during the presentation. Now, if your question is not answered during the webinar, perhaps your question has been selected for a live session, which will be at the conclusion of this particular session, Unpaid Parental Leave. And if it's not addressed then, we will email you the answer to your question to the email address you use for registration. Now, if there's another email address that you'd like us to use to provide your answer, please put that in the questions box. But some questions may require more information, so you may be asked to just contact us. So here we are. We are at session 5, the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance. I'm Beverly. Our presenter for this session is Bernice Casey. Bianca Polovina is in the questions and answers box. And we have Joyce Suro in the chat box. And let's cue this up to Bernice. Here we go, Bernice.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, everybody, give me a moment.
Do you need help forwarding the slide?
Yeah, I'm having problems with the slides, Beverly.
Okay, let me take it back. Let me try it one more time, and if not, I can navigate for you.
Okay, let's see. Okay, great. Thanks, Beverly. Thank you, everyone. As Beverly said, my name is Bernice. I am one of the compliance officers on the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance team. Although Beverly went over a couple highlight items, I'd like to, before I start my presentation, talk about that. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an overview of your requirements of the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance. If you have specific questions about a specific employee, please contact our office directly and we'll be able to provide you more detailed answers. We will be able to answer general questions that you have about the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance. So please, as I'm going through my presentation, utilize the chat feature to do that, and Bianca will respond. What is the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance? It is a law that's the only law like this exists in San Francisco. It was created so that employees who were eligible for paid family leave, a bonding benefit to the state of California's Employment Development Department, would take that benefit and not see a wage loss. So the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance requires covered employers to pay covered employees additional money while they're on paid family leave for bonding with a new child. So who's covered by this law? Which of you on this call are required to comply with this law? Any employer who has 20 or more employees globally So that doesn't mean you need to have 20 employees in San Francisco. If you have 7 employees in Marin County, 9 employees in San Mateo County, and you have 4 employees in San Francisco, that global count is 20, and therefore you are a covered employer. If you are on this webinar and are a city and county agency, this law does not apply to you. It does not apply to government entities like the San Francisco Unified School District, like the University of California, San Francisco. As a covered employer, what are you required to do? And as Beverly's presentation just really pushed on and emphasized, I want to do the same thing here. When you are required to do something as an employer for any of our laws, you want to make sure you're documenting what you do. So as a covered employer, you're required to post the PPLO poster, the notice. And when you do that, you want to keep a record of when you did it and what locations you did it at. You want to make sure that you're providing the PPLO form to any employee who's expecting to become a parent. Sometimes employees tell you when they're 7 weeks pregnant. Sometimes employees tell you when they've already finalized the adoption. As soon as an employee tells you that they have become or going to become a parent, you are required to provide them with the PPLO form, which you can find on our website, and you want to keep a record of when and how the method you provided them with the PPLO form. And then what do you need to do? Well, once you provide the employee with the PPLO form, you're waiting for them to return it. And once you get the returned PPLO form and proof that the employee is on paid family leave, you're going to calculate and begin to pay that employee supplemental compensation. So who's covered by this law? Which employees do you have to make supplemental compensation payments to? Anybody who performs work in the geographical boundaries of San Francisco, who's been employed for at least 180 days. And as Beverly said in her previous presentation, if you have an employee that worked for you for the first quarter, January through March, and then returned to work in July, as soon as that employee hits the 180 days of employment, they're covered by the law. So if they exit employment before they have 180 days, as soon as they come back, you start the clock again. You don't have to restart it. In anybody who has applied for and is receiving paid family leave through the Employment Development Department, there are other laws that as employers you may be familiar with, the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, California Family Rights Act, CFRA. The PPLO does not require that employees meet the CFRA and FMLA definition for protected leave. Again, the PPLO does not require that employees be CFRA and FMLA certified. What the law requires is, does the employee work in San Francisco at least 8 hours or more per week? Are they receiving paid family leave to bond with a child? And have they been employed by you for at least 180 days? The PPLO look back period is is a phrase that comes out. Let's try that again. The PPLO look back period is a term that comes up a lot for the PPLO. And it refers to the 12 weekly, if someone's on a weekly pay schedule, 6 semi-monthly, so for employers who pay semi-monthly, or the 6 biweekly, so for employers that pay biweekly, or the 3 monthly pay periods prior to the employee's first day of leave. And you're using those pay periods to do a couple things. First, you want to establish what an employee's normal gross weekly wage is. So this gives you the look back period to average the number of pay stubs and the total gross amount of those pay stubs to determine someone's normal gross weekly wage. If you have employees that work, 2 hours one week, 15 hours another week, 3 hours another week, you would use the PPLO look back period and you'd look at the number of hours worked and determine if that person had an average of 8 hours. If you as an employer have a workforce that varies like quite a bit, so some quarters you have 13 people, some quarters you have 27 people, some quarters you have 7 people, in order to determine if you are covered by the law for a specific employee who goes out on paid family leave, you're going to use that look back period, basically the 3 months prior to someone going out on leave, and you're going to average the number of employees you had performing work by the week. And if that average ends up being 20 or more employees, for this employee that's gone out on paid family leave, you would be a covered employer. If someone works in San Francisco part of the time and works in Marin County the other part of the time, and you're not sure if they've been performing 40% or more of their work in San Francisco, then you'd also utilize the look back period to determine if they were working at least 40%. So again, you use a look back period to determine if you're a covered employer, to determine an employee's normal gross weekly wage, and to determine if an employee's work location and work time fluctuates, that they meet the 8-hour or 40% threshold. So on our website, we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the presentation. Joyce just put it in the chat, so you have that. But there is a list of resources. One of them is the poster that I talked about before, but the other is this really handy employer's checklist. This is on our website in English, Spanish, and Chinese. As Beverly said, keep records, and I'm sure our other presenters said the same thing. When you have an employee who's going to become a parent, I advise employers to print this out and literally do a checklist so you know when did you put the poster up, when did you give the employee the PPLO form, and then once the employee has returned the PPLO form with their notice of computation, and it's someone whose hours are fluctuating or they work at different locations, the step 3 is that you've determined their eligibility. And then once you've determined they're eligible, you're going to calculate and pay compensation payments. And you need to keep records of when you make payments. You want to keep a record of which checks you've provided people, and if those check numbers included supplemental compensation, you want to make sure you're keeping records. So again, the employer's to-do list is on our website. I would strongly urge you to keep records of these 4 things for every employee who becomes a parent. I think it's also helpful to let employees know what they're required to do under this law. This employee's to-do list is on our website in English, Spanish, and in Chinese. It's really important when you are giving an individual the PPLO form that you give it to them in the language they communicate with the most. So if someone is a Spanish speaker, but they may use English at work, you want to make sure you have it on our website that you give them the PPLO form in Spanish, the employee to-do list in Spanish, because that information is going to be easier for them to access. And once they have information that's easier for them to access, it'll make your job easier because they'll know exactly what they have to do. So what do employees have to do? They have to apply for California paid family leave. They can do that online or through paper form. Sometimes if someone does not have a California identification card or a driver's license, the EDD system will not allow them to apply for online, so they can apply for it in paper form. They can request that form through the EDD, or they can go to the EDD office in San Francisco, which is at 745 Franklin Street, Suite 300, Cross Street, Turk. So again, you can direct them to go to the EDD office in San Francisco. Once they've applied for paid family leave, they're going to complete the San Francisco paid parental leave form and return it to you. And as the employer, what you're looking for is the information the employees provided in section 2 of the form. So section 2 of the PPLO form is where the employees indicated hey, employer, I've attached my notice of computation, or the employee has said, hey, employer, I've given you permission to contact the EDD on my behalf. So that's what, when you, first thing you look at when you get that returned PPLO form is section 2, and make sure that you know how you as the employer are going to get the EDD information. Either the employee gave it to you or you're going to need to contact the EDD. Then the employee should keep all of their records that they're getting from the EDD. So their notice of computation, their notice of payments, or quote unquote receipts. And this information will be helpful because if you as the employer are not able to get a hold of the EDD, you can go back to the employee and say, look, we tried to get a hold of the EDD on April 23rd and April 24th. We can't get a hold of them. Do you have your notice of computation or your notice of payment? And the reason I say those two documents is both documents have the EDD weekly amount. And that's the amount you need, the EDD weekly amount, in order to determine the amount of compensation owed to an employee. So I am not an expert on paid family leave. We have this slide in here mostly for the phone number that's at the very bottom of the slide because it's a non-published number. Paid family leave is an employee funded benefit, right? So an employee who has payroll deductions, usually coded as CASDI, taken out of their paycheck, and they work in California, they are paying into this benefit. So when they become a parent, they can get into the benefit and be paid out. It's an 8-week partial benefit, and you can take paid family leave to care for an ill family member, or as applicable to the San Francisco law, to bond with a newborn, an adopted child, or a foster child. There are some changes in the award amounts this year. So in 2025, depending on your income, the EDD will make an award 70% to 90% up to the cap. So just like with the PPLO cap that we'll talk about later, the EDD has a cap every year. Both parents can take leave at the same or different time. If both parents work for the same employer, the same thing applies. And this leave, paid family leave, can be taken consecutively, meaning you can take it all 8 weeks in a row, or you can break it up. You can break it up into smaller chunks, like 2 weeks over a 7-month period. You know, you take 2 weeks every couple weeks. You can take it in days and you can take it in hours. What's important here is it must be taken within 1 year of the birth, adoption, or foster placement. So if employees are breaking their leave up, make sure you explain to them that they have to take the leave, or at least start the leave, 44 weeks after their child is born, adopted, or placed with them. And the reason I say 44 is because the benefit is 8 weeks, and you must exhaust your all 8 weeks of leave before the 52 weeks of your child's birth, adoption, or placement. So what do you need to do? What information do you need as an employer to comply with the law and pay the employee? You need the completed PPLO form. You need the EDD weekly rate. Now, again, you can get that by calling the EDD if the employee gave you permission to do so when they completed their PFL form, or you can request that the employee provide you the notice of computation. We strongly encourage the employee, when completing the PPLO form, specifically section 2, to choose both options, to say, hey, employer, I'm attaching my notice of computation, but I've also given you permission to contact the EDD if you have questions. And then you need to know your employee's gross weekly wage. And you can get that by utilizing the online calculator that's on our website that we'll talk about a little bit more. And you gather that information from your own payroll records and any information the employee puts on the PPLO form. So here's a fairly simplified example. If you have an employee that makes $1,000 a week, the EDD is going to give them $700, right? And so then you need to make the difference up. So the compensation amount in this example, for every $1,000 that employee was earning per week gross prior to going out on leave, they're going to get $700 from the EDD and $300 from you, the employer. As I talked about earlier, there is a cap. So the EDD cap this year is $16.81 per week. So for your high wage earners, usually someone who's making over $152,000 a year, they're going to get $16.81. Even if they make 200,000, they're going to get 1681. That's the max they'll get from the EDD. And every year we have a cap for the PPLO. And when we talk about the PPLO cap, it includes both what the EDD is paying that employee and what the employer is required to pay. So if your employee's gross weekly wages are $2,402 or more per week, you can apply that cap, meaning you can say, hey, I know my employee makes $3,000 a week, but I'm going to apply the cap, which means once they get that 1681 per week from the EDD, I'm going to pay them the difference of the 721. So the difference of the 1681 from the cap is $721 in supplemental compensation. So part of the main non-compliance or just errors that we see are about pay periods. You want to make sure that when you are looking at someone's normal gross weekly wage, that you're looking at full pay periods. So if someone was pregnant and they went out on disability and they were on disability prior to applying for paid family leave and they were getting, $500 a week or some minimal amount of money from you, you cannot use those pay periods. You can only use full pay periods. I'm going to stop now because I've been talking at you and I want to just kind of remind you of a couple of things. We will be answering general questions, but if you have specific questions, specifically something like, hey, we have an employee, I'm not sure what pay periods to use, this is kind of confusing, this is the first time we've done this, please call our office and we'll walk you through the steps you need to take in order to ensure that you're using the proper pay periods to come up with that employee's normal gross weekly wage. Some of the things that come up a lot for us is people still get confused, for lack of a better word, and they think that this law only applies to pregnant people. This does not just apply to mothers, it applies to anyone who's a parent. So make sure anybody who tells you they're going to be a parent, they're going to be fostering their niece and nephew. That's a parent. That is a benefit. Sorry, that is a change in parental status that it makes someone eligible for paid family leave and therefore PPLO. Another thing that happens is people tell their employees, oh, you have to take all 8 weeks at once. As I said previously, paid family leave can be taken either all 8 weeks at once or an employee can break it up. So this one can be a little bit more confusing. We've talked again about who's covered by this law, and it's someone who's worked for you for 180 days. If you have someone who started work on January 1st and they're a pregnant person and they go out on leave on June 24th, you may think, oh, I don't need to tell them about this law. But because they're eligible for a disability benefit first as a pregnant person, that means that when their disability benefit is over, they're going to be eligible for paid family leave, which would most likely be sometime in mid-August to early September. And in that case, the 180 days would have been met by July 2nd. So that employee is covered by this law. So the best thing is if you have someone who is telling you they're going to be a parent, is provide them with a PPLO form and then let them know once they they return it to you, you can establish whether or not they're covered by the law. You want to make sure that you're keeping really good records of when someone tells you, and that you can be HR, it can be their manager, it can be the store supervisor, the location supervisor. As soon as an employee tells someone they're going to be a parent, you want to make sure that you start your documentation. So here's the best practices. If you have an employee handbook, if you have an employee portal, this law has been around since 2017. And one of the rules is if you have an employee handbook or portal, you need to have information in there for your San Francisco workforce about how you comply with the PPLO. Make sure you're training everyone. As Beverly said, these trainings are going to be saved to our website. You have a new manager come up, queue up PPLO, make sure they listen to me and hear what I have to say. There's other trainings about PPLO on our website. Make sure someone is listening to that and they know what's required of them. Make sure you keep records of all the PPLO forms, so meaning you know that where to access them in Chinese and Spanish and English. Make sure you are keeping really good records of when you gave the PPLO form to the employee and when they returned it. You're in constant communication with the employee during, before, and after leave, so the employee knows what is required of them. You may have to send them that employee step-by-step guide a few times. Maintain all the EDD records. Some EDD records will come directly to you. Make sure you're keeping records of those and any EDD records the employee provides you. Use the calculation instructions on our PPLO website. There's an Excel calculator. You can download it and you can save it under the name of the employee for whom you're trying to calculate the supplemental compensation rate. And you want to start paying your employee as soon as you have the completed PPLO form and notice of computation at the regular scheduled pay periods. So if your payroll closes on April 25th, and you get the form on April 28th, you don't have to pay them that pay period. You can wait until the next pay period. But as soon as you get the completed PPLO form and notice of computation or notice of payment, you're going to begin to pay them. And then again, please contact us if you have any questions. On our website, you'll find the official notice, the webinar slides, either to this presentation or another one, the Excel calculator, written out calculation instructions, FAQs, rules, and the employee and employer documents that I've covered in multiple languages. Bianca, do we have any questions that I can take at this point?
Bernice, we have answered all of the questions that are in the chat box, or the Q&A box rather, but I'm going to throw you one that we hear all the time, which is, I learned so much in this presentation. I think I made a mistake last year. I think I forgot to pay somebody their supplemental compensation last year. What should I do?
So please call 415-554-4190. If you're concerned about any past compliance issues, you want to make sure you reach out directly to our office. Bianca or I will, speak with you, ask you some more general questions, and then we can advise you on some next steps. But if you're concerned about past compliance in the last 3 years, please reach out to our office. And the reason I say that is if we're able to help you self-correct without there being an audit from our office, it will save you money in the end.
All right, I think that's it, Bernice.
Okay.
Well, folks, thank you so much for attending the Paid Parental Leave Ordinance session. I want to thank Bernice and Bianca, and of course Joyce. And I see Jade is still answering some of the questions that you put in there from an earlier session. We have our next session that is coming up, which is the Healthcare Security Ordinance, as well as the Military Leave Pay Protection Act. It's going to start at 12:30 p.m., so we have a little bit of a break. We'll see you back here at 12:30. Thank you.